On July 24th, 2012, just after 8 o'clock p.m., a couple in White Marsh, Maryland spotted a silver sedan parked in a pull-off area near the intersection of Ebenezer Road and the Pulaski Highway. This just so happened to be on property that they owned, in this small and unincorporated community in Baltimore County. In and around the silver sedan, which again was pulled onto the shoulder of the road, this couple could make out two figures. There was a man outside of the car, walking around, who, unusually enough, was wearing gloves. Seeing that it was the middle of the summer, and temperatures had exceeded 90 degrees that day, this was very odd. There was also another figure inside the car, an older woman by the look of it, who seemed to be wearing a mask of some sort. There also appeared to be a white shirt or sheet covering up the rear driver's side window, which, again, was very unusual. The more that this couple observed about the situation, it began to give them each the feeling that something was very wrong. So they asked the man outside of the car what he was doing, and he gave them the brief response of, quote, "That's my mother, she's got Alzheimer's." Within moments, as if on cue, the man had gotten back into the driver's seat of the silver sedan, which was a Lincoln Town car. He peeled out, and the couple that had been observing the situation made sure to write down the vehicle's license plate number, Baltimore plates that read SMR 308. As the driver sped off down the road, the couple began dialing 911. They told the dispatcher what had just unfolded. A vehicle pulled off on the side of the road, a strange man walking around with gloves on, an elderly woman in the back seat who might have been kidnapped, and the man's direction upon driving off. They also gave the vehicle's license plate number in the hopes that it could lead to an identity. It turned out that this license plate number belonged to an influential figure in the Baltimore region, a figure that baseball fans all across the country were likely familiar with. You see, this woman's husband, as well as two of her sons, had helped establish a sports dynasty, which she had played a pivotal role in. Police would perform a wellness check upon the woman's house later that evening, and her absence made it clear that something had happened to her. Soon enough, police came to the understanding that the man driving her around was a kidnapper, and the search to find her had begun. This is the abduction of Violet Ripken. Welcome to Unresolved. I am your host, Micheal Whelan. Before I continue on in the episode, I just want to take a minute to let you know how you can help support this show. You can help support Unresolved by spreading the word to your friends and family who might be interested in listening. But you can also go above and beyond by heading to patreon.com/unresolvedpod and becoming a patron. Patrons get the first crack at each new episode, and also get exclusive bonus episodes. I just recently released a mini episode about the mysterious death of a Georgia hunter named Jeffrey Gebhardt, and I also recently released the third episode of my exclusive Patreon series, Resolved. Trust me when I say that story is quite the doozy. New episodes of Resolved drop on the 15th of each month, and once again, you can only get that at patreon.com/unresolvedpod. To learn more about this show, just listen through to the end of this episode, or visit the podcast website at unresolved.me. Now, let's return to the story. Violet Ripken, who many have come to know by her nickname, Vi, grew up in Aberdeen, Maryland, a small town about 30 miles northeast of Baltimore. There, she would fall in love with and eventually marry her high school sweetheart, Cal Ripken, a young man who had his sights set on an athletic career in baseball. In 1957, Cal Ripken was signed by his hometown team, the Baltimore Orioles. Over a roughly 7-year professional career, he would struggle to make it to the big leagues, enduring a long line of injuries that would keep him out of the lineup. However, even though his playing career ended in 1964, he would eventually settle into a lengthy career as a coach and manager. By that time, Violet had given birth to 4 children, 3 sons named Cal Jr., Billy, and Fred, and also a daughter named Ellen. Even though the family owned a house in Aberdeen, Maryland, which they would always consider home, They quickly became used to the traveling ways of minor league and Major League Baseball as Cal Sr. worked his way up the Baltimore Orioles organization in a variety of positions, including third base coach, bullpen coach, scout, and even team manager. Due to his positions changing almost every year, or every other year, this required the family to move around constantly. By the time the 1980s came around, two of the couple's kids were cementing themselves as Major League Baseball players. First came Cal Jr., then Billy a few years later, both of whom had been drafted by the same organization their father worked for, the Baltimore Orioles. Billy would establish himself as a solid major leaguer who showed a lot of promise but, like his father, had a career bogged down with numerous injuries. Meanwhile, his older brother, Cal Ripken Jr., became one of the most well-known baseball players, maybe ever, earning a tremendous number of accolades and spending his entire 20-year Major League career with his hometown Baltimore Orioles. During that span, he became known as baseball's Iron Man, who started a record 2,632 consecutive games, which shattered the previous record, which had been held by the New York Yankees' Lou Gehrig, and is unlikely to ever be touched by another athlete again. He retired in 2001 and was voted to the Baseball Hall of Fame 6 years later, in his first year of eligibility. By then, Cal Ripken Jr. had become a figure that transcended the game. By the time that Cal Jr. and Billy's careers came to an end, their father, Cal Ripken Sr., had passed away. Cal Sr. had been able to manage both of his sons in the major leagues, having been the manager for the Baltimore Orioles between 1987 and 1988. And to this day, remains the only manager in Major League history to manage two sons at the same time. In his final years, he had become more of a figurehead for the Orioles organization, having walked away from coaching and managing to spend more time with his wife, Violet. The two had continued to live at their split-level home in Aberdeen, along Clover Street, which they had owned for several decades, and had become known as a haven for the Ripken clan. In a 1986 interview with the Evening Sun, Violet had spoken about her reverence for the region. Quote, "I hope I never have to move. Our life simply centers on Aberdeen. It's a small town. My family, our neighbors. I don't think money or being a media family will change our lifestyle. We will always be just what we are." Unfortunately, Violet's husband, Cal Ripken Sr., passed away in 1999 due to complications from lung cancer. Years of tobacco use had taken their toll, and she was left widowed in her early 60s. She would continue to live at the house she had shared with her husband, which all of her 4 children had once known as home. She continued to be surrounded by her kids, her grandchildren, and numerous other loved ones. After her husband's passing, Violet continued to find projects to fill her time with. She became the founding chairwoman of the Cal Ripken Sr. Foundation, a non-profit organization set up in 2001, which looked to give at-risk youths access to athletic programs designed to build character and camaraderie. It was designed with her husband Cal Sr.'s values in mind, and she played an active role in the guiding direction for the organization. She also dedicated time to other organizations such as the Boys and Girls Club, which allowed her to work with underprivileged kids. Violet was also a regular at local minor league baseball games nearby, especially the Baltimore Orioles minor league affiliate, the Aberdeen Ironbirds, which was just one of 3 minor league teams owned by her son, Cal Jr. Their playing ground was just a short drive away from her home, and just so happened to bear the name of her family, having been named Ripken Stadium. At 74 years old, Violet Ripken had a daily routine, which began at around the same time every morning. It started with her getting the newspaper from her front porch, and eventually led to her making a trip to her nearby McDonald's. It was a routine that her neighbors and friends had picked up on over the years, especially her next-door neighbor, who had lived next to her for more than 3 decades. However, it was later theorized that this routine might have been noticed by someone with intentions that were anything but pure. On July 24th, 2012, a Tuesday, Violet's morning routine unfolded as it always did. It was a warm summer day in Aberdeen, Maryland, about 30 miles northeast of Baltimore, and Violet was preparing to leave the home she had lived in for approximately 46 years. Sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, Violet entered her garage and was greeted by a horrifying sight. A strange man was standing in her garage, seemingly waiting for her. He was wearing a ski mask and gloves, and was holding a handgun. He directed Violet towards her own vehicle, a silver 1998 Lincoln Town Car. There, Violet was bound and blindfolded. The man bound her ankles and wrist with rope, and originally planned to wrap duct tape over her eyes and put her in the trunk. However, she seems to have pleaded with him not to, due to her suffering from claustrophobia, and the man seemed to show pity upon her. He instead placed the duct tape over her glasses, which kept her mostly in the dark, and he allowed her to sit in the back seat. This allowed her to see a little bit through her peripheral vision. Later, the man seemed to realize this, and replaced the duct tape with a mask of some sort, which more completely blocked her vision. In the back seat of her own car, Violet Ripken was driven away from her home. The man did not seem to tell her where she was going, or why he was taking her, but seemed to drive her around for most of the day. Eventually, he put a white shirt or a sheet over the back window on the driver's side, in an attempt to hide Violet from the world at large. Violet's abductor seemed to make multiple stops for gas and food, and seemed to not be overly malicious or harmful. He kept reassuring her that he was not going to harm her, and even shared cigarettes and fast food with the woman. Sometimes it appeared that he didn't even know who she was, making no mention of her baseball-playing husband or sons. In fact, he seemed almost oblivious to the fact, and just kept driving around the Baltimore region for several hours. For more than 12 hours, no one was aware that Violet Ripken had been abducted. Since she lived alone and autonomously, it wasn't until roughly 8:30 p.m. that she was reported missing. It was around 8:30 p.m. when the couple that lived near White Marsh, Maryland encountered a strange man pulled off on the side of the road. This was on property they owned, near the intersection of Ebenezer Road and the Pulaski Highway, roughly 20 miles away from Violet's home. After witnessing this strange sight, which I detailed in the episode intro, they decided to jot down the license plate number of the vehicle, which they then forwarded to police dispatchers, who then quickly linked the license plate to 74-year-old Violet Ripken. At around 8:35 p.m., Baltimore County Police contacted officials with the Harford County Sheriff's Department, who held jurisdiction over Violet's home in Aberdeen. They were told that a, quote, elderly woman with silver hair, unquote, appeared to have been taken captive by a man wearing gloves, and they were provided with the information given by the 911 caller. Police in Aberdeen were dispatched to the Ripken home along Clover Street, and it quickly became clear that neither Violet nor her vehicle were at her house. It was now past 9 p.m., and she was definitely supposed to be home at that time, as she generally turned in pretty early. Police began reaching out to all of Violet's known friends and family, and none of them had any idea where she could be, other than at home. Police entered Violet's house and quickly discovered her cell phone, indicating that she had not left of her own accord. They began scouring the home, looking for any clues, and even began combing through the surrounding area. Her neighborhood quickly came to a standstill, with a noticeable police presence lining the surrounding streets and intersections, shutting down through traffic and causing residents to take lengthy detours. Officers even began going door to door, canvassing her friends and neighbors for information, such as when they had last seen her, if they had seen anything suspicious, etc. One neighbor told police that she had seen an unfamiliar pickup truck on their street a few days earlier, which had been driving back and forth along the road. At the time, this neighbor had no idea that Violet was missing, because police had not publicized that information yet. But this lead was collected by officers as they struggled to learn what had happened to Violet Ripken. Police concluded that Violet had been abducted earlier that day, possibly in the morning, and they were prepared to issue a public plea for help at around 5:30 a.m. on Wednesday. On the morning of Wednesday, July 25th, 2012, the 24-hour mark of Violet's disappearance was rapidly approaching. Police sent out a press briefing that morning, informing the world at large of Violet Ripken's disappearance and possible kidnapping, and had to hope that the release of this information could help lead to her safe return. About 45 minutes after that press briefing was released, at around 6:15 a.m., A 28-year-old neighbor of Violet's named Eric Kneier was returning home from an overnight shift at a nearby warehouse. He was driving through their neighborhood, Clover Street, and was forced to turn around due to the police presence blocking the road. They were still looking for clues in Violet's disappearance, and Eric had to turn around and go a roundabout way to get home. However, just moments later, Eric came upon an unusual sight. He saw a silver sedan parked not too far away, with an elderly woman sitting in the back seat. Most intriguingly, she was waving a sweatshirt out of an open window, while simultaneously trying to honk the car horn. Kneier alerted the police and told them about this suspicious sight, which ultimately led to the safe return of Violet Ripken. Police came upon the vehicle and discovered that Violet Ripken's Lincoln town car had been returned to the neighborhood she lived in. Surprisingly, the driver had abandoned the car just down the block from her home in Aberdeen, with her in the back seat, her hands still bound. The culprit had safely returned Violet to the area of her home, but never told her why she had been abducted. He also did not seem to leave any kind of note or rationale for his behavior, with there being no explanation for her abduction and subsequent return. As far as police knew, there had been no ransom attempt, and the culprit had seemingly left on foot, unless he had some other method of escape nearby. Mike Hudson, a man whose mother lived across the street from Violet, told reporters later that day, quote, "It's just hard to believe the guy came all the way back on the street and dropped her off. That makes me believe he was a local, very local." Police began trying to piece together the specific details of this crime, but were shocked to learn that Violet's abductor had returned her completely unharmed. In fact, other than her being bound and blindfolded, the kidnapper seems to have actually treated her well. Gus Kowalewski, a neighbor of Violet's whom she later confided in, spoke to the media about the ordeal she had gone through. Quote, "He lit cigarettes for her. They stopped for food. He said, 'I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to take you back.' And that's what he did. He said he just wanted money and her car." The Ripken family would release a statement later that evening, thanking police and stating their gratefulness for having Violet, the family matriarch, back home safe and sound. On the afternoon of July 25th, just hours after Violet had returned home, the Aberdeen Police Department held a brief press conference.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. The Aberdeen Police Department received a call from the Baltimore County Police Department last night at about 8:30 p.m., at which time County Police had received a call about a suspicious vehicle in the Ebenezer Road area of the county, and the information that was obtained at that time led to the investigation of Miss Ripken's disappearance. At about 6:15 this morning, Mrs. Ripken was located unharmed in her vehicle in close proximity to her residence. At that time, she was assessed by local paramedics from the Aberdeen Fire Department, where she was not found to be injured, and at this time she is resting with her family. Between 7 and 8 a.m. Tuesday morning, we believe a male subject approached Miss Ripken at her residence, produced a handgun, and forced Miss Ripken into her vehicle, at which time he fled the area. After he fled the area, we believe that he drove throughout central Maryland, and at this time we are not sure what locations he was at, what time he was driving in what counties, and that is still under investigation at this time. Police are still looking for a white male, late 30s to early 40s, with a tall, thin build. He was last seen wearing a light-colored shirt, camo pants, and eyeglasses. We believe the male is still armed with the handgun and should be considered dangerous. This investigation was handled by the Aberdeen Police Department with assistance from the FBI, the Harford County Sheriff's Office, the Maryland State Police, and the Baltimore County Police. We all worked together and collaborated in this investigation. That is the facts that most know already, so if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
What's the suspect's motive?
Okay.
What's the motive?
The entire time? Was she in the car the entire time? She was missing for about 24 hours or so, or unaccounted for. And can you describe what state, when you did find her, was she tied up? Was she gagged? What can you tell us?
What I can tell you right now, that her state, of course, she was upset when we found her. How we found her and what she was wearing and whether she was bound at the time that we put her out of the car, we are not releasing at this time. The investigators are still talking to her and witnesses to determine exactly what happened and where it happened.
Was the credit card used, ATM card? What was the motive?
Motive is unknown at this time. Like I said, investigators are still out there. This case is still brand new. We are really beginning the investigation. We have several investigators from several agencies out there talking to as many witnesses as we can. Since we've put the information out, we've gotten several calls from throughout the area, and each one of these calls are being interviewed. Each one of these callers are being interviewed, and their information is being investigated.
Mrs. Ripken doesn't believe this guy knew who she was. She's saying that he didn't recognize the Ironburg stuff. Is there anything, do you think this was a Ripken kidnapping, or is this just some random crime? What do you think at this point?
Right now, we can't speak of what the motive is. Like I said, we are still looking at this investigation. We are looking at every witness, every clue. For us to say or speculate on a motive would be unfair and it just wouldn't be true.
Chief, what if any contact was there between the kidnapper and the Ripken family? Any kind of ransom demand, anything like that?
And if you can look straight ahead as you answer.
Yeah, at this time we don't know what, if any, relationship there was between the perpetrator of this crime and Ripken family.
Was there a ransom demand? Any demand for money?
At this time I can say we know of no ransom demand.
Did he use your ATM?
One question, was it her, which car was he driving around in? Was it her car or was it another vehicle? Because it's unclear from the state and from the news release.
He was driving her vehicle, which was a silver Lincoln Continental. I believe it was a 1998. He was driving her vehicle. She was taken from her residence in her vehicle, and she was located back at her residence in her vehicle.
Was she in the trunk? Was she in the trunk at the time?
All right, thank you very much. That is all we can talk about right now. As soon as we know anything else, and like I said, this thing is moving very quickly, and we are interviewing people as we are right here. There's people being interviewed right now. As soon as we know something, we will let you know, and any pertinent information we will get out to the media as soon as possible.
Was it a citizen's tip?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The investigation into this strange kidnapping officially started on the evening of Tuesday, July 24th, approximately 12 hours after Violet had been abducted from her own garage. After abducting Mrs. Ripken from her home, the kidnapper seemed to have no set destination in mind. He kind of just kept driving around central and western Maryland, making his way through Harford, Baltimore, and Frederick counties. Police also believe that he made his way as far north as Pennsylvania, which put this crime in federal jurisdiction. This invited the FBI to establish a presence in this case, and eventually allowed them to oversee the investigation. However, even though police were able to track this man's strange trip around the region, there seemed to be no rhyme or reason for any of it. As far as anyone could tell, he did not have a specific destination in mind, and just kept driving for most of the 23 hours that Violet was missing. There seemed to be no way to track their trip, and no specific locales have ever been disclosed by investigators. It was also unknown how the kidnapper had managed to drive Violet's vehicle back into her neighborhood, which was under the watchful eye of several police officers. There was an increased police presence through the entire neighborhood, and the sudden reappearance of her vehicle indicated that her kidnapper was either a local who perhaps lived nearby, or was incredibly familiar with the region. Police would later admit that they were in the middle of a shift change at the time that Violet's vehicle was discovered by her neighbor. This was likely how the abductor had managed to slip in and out without being seen. But investigators just might not have been on the lookout for him so close to Violet's home. After all, nobody anticipated the culprit being brazen enough to return the vehicle back to the original crime scene, especially not with so many police combing the streets nearby. The odds of that happening had to be slim to none. Out of all of the factors in this case that were unknown, The one that was most mystifying to investigators was the motivation. Based on information obtained by investigators, it was not believed that Violet knew her abductor, or vice versa. He seemed to have no idea who she was, and during their travels, asked Violet multiple questions about items in her car. These were items that had the logo of the Aberdeen Ironbirds, the local minor league baseball team that was affiliated with the Baltimore Orioles. It was a single-A baseball team owned by Violet's son, Micheal Whelan Jr., and the abductor seemed to have no idea who or what they were. Some speculated that this might have actually been why she was later returned home, as the abductor might have chickened out after he figured out that she was the mother of one of the most well-known baseball players of all time. Perhaps he did not want the scrutiny that would come from potentially harming such a public figure, and might have originally targeted her simply because he thought she was a rich older woman, not anyone with a particularly high profile. Investigators seem to regard the fact that she was returned home safe as being incredibly noteworthy in and of itself. Safe returns are not typical for kidnapping cases. Of course, the likely motivation, as speculated by members of the press, was that this must have been some kind of ransom attempt by someone looking to bilk money out of a local celebrity. However, police would state that this was not likely, due to the abductor seeming to not know Violet Ripken's identity, or her association to one of America's most well-known athletes. There also seemed to be nothing hinting at any kind of ransom demand, or a ransom having been paid out by the family. That did not seem to change in the coming days and weeks, with police releasing no information ever hinting at a ransom demand or a payment. Robbery seemed to be the most likely motivation for this abductor, as it was later found out that the man had taken Violet's credit cards and used them on the day she was kidnapped. However, police would never announce what it was that the abductor had bought with the credit cards, believing that information should remain confidential, likely to help weed out false confessions in the future. The day after Violet Ripken returned home, Thursday, July 26th, police released images from a surveillance camera, which showed this mysterious abductor entering a nearby store. The store's details were not disclosed by police at the time, claiming that it could compromise their investigation. But people that saw the images later pieced it together as a Walmart in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. More specifically, it was a Walmart in Glen Burnie, a town roughly 40 miles southeast of Violet's home in Aberdeen. Despite initially releasing just a few stills of this footage, police would eventually release a roughly 30-second clip, which showed this man entering the store and shopping. The footage actually gets a pretty good look at the man, with some cameras getting relatively high-resolution images of his face and features, which fit in with how Violet and the other witnesses had described the man. He was a white man who looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, who was pretty tall and thin. He was estimated to stand around 5 feet 10 inches tall, weigh around 200 pounds, with short brown hair and normal-looking features. He also wore glasses. At the time of the abduction, he was wearing a light-colored shirt with camo-patterned pants, but the surveillance footage released by investigators shows him wearing a long white shirt and jeans, as well as an orange, black, and white baseball cap, which, ironically, are the colors worn by the Baltimore Orioles. Police would announce that they had additional surveillance footage of the man from other establishments, including other retail chains, convenience stores, and fast food restaurants. Yet they've been pretty secretive about this footage, choosing only to release still images of this man on one other occasion. Later that year, in November of 2012. That November, roughly 4 months after the abduction of Violet Ripken, police revealed additional photos of the culprit, which were taken at a Walmart in Middle River, Maryland, about 20 miles away from the other Walmart in Glen Burnie. This footage shows the man wearing different clothing, including a different hat, and police claim that this footage was taken the day after Violet was returned home, July 26th. Later, detectives would reveal that the man was returning items he had purchased at the Glen Burnie Walmart 2 days prior, having paid for them with Violet's credit cards. Yet again, investigators would not disclose what the items were, choosing to keep that information confidential. At the same time that these photos were released, in November of 2012, police also released images of a green Dodge minivan from the Walmart parking lot. which had some notable bumper stickers on the back and side windows. Police did not state that the abductor had been driving the minivan, but only that the driver of the minivan might have information about the culprit, so investigators wanted to speak to them, whoever they were. The surveillance images of the culprit, which had been obtained from numerous cameras in the region, led police to create a sketch of the man, which was aided by Violet Ripken's witness testimony. In addition to the surveillance images, this police sketch was released to the public and featured on billboards in the surrounding area. In particular, billboards along I-95 and I-83, areas that this abductor likely frequented or where he was known by others. Police cautioned everyone to be mindful of this man, and he was to be considered armed and dangerous. In August of 2012, just about a week after the safe return of his mother, Micheal Whelan Jr. spoke to reporters at a press conference.
I think there's really a couple reasons why I'm here today. First and foremost, everyone's been asking how the family is, how mom is, how she's doing from a health standpoint. And I appreciate all the outpouring of love and support for our family, and I want to be able to report that mom is doing pretty good. It's a traumatic situation that she was involved in, traumatic for all of us in the family, and we're trying really hard to come together and support each other in this. But mom, by and large, is a tough, strong woman. Was able to endure this, but she's doing pretty good. So again, I just want to thank everyone for their concern and thoughts for our family. Secondly, I think I'm here because to deliver a message that law enforcement needs your help. The investigation is moving along. If you know anything about the case, if you know anything about the identity of the person in the photos, the sketch, I would encourage all of you to call in and report what you know. It was very emotional. I think that we were all thinking the worst possible things during the course of time when we were looking for her. And not knowing what the reason was, and we still don't know really the motivation.
In November of that year, Micheal Whelan Jr. spoke further about the abduction and the effect it was having upon his mother. Quote, "Mom is forever affected, there's no doubt about it. We are forever affected as a result of that, and it's a little unsettling. He's still out there, and I think Mom is coping as best she can. That's the hard part in many ways, to cope with it. You want to forget about it, but you can't forget about it until there is some sort of closure." Police continued their investigation, hoping to find some kind of closure for Violet and her family months after her abduction. They had received a tip from a local inmate named Michael Molitor, who had pointed them towards a potential suspect. However, it came to light in April of 2013 that this tip was not credible, due to evidence going against Molitor's named person of interest, who was later revealed to be a former acquaintance of his. It was believed that Michael Molitor only forwarded the name to police in an effort to get himself bailed out of jail, and it came to light that he had a history of giving false information to the police, having done so just a few years earlier, in July of 2010, following an arrest. An investigator later testified against Molitor, and he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for drug offenses. By then, the person he had named had been completely ruled out as a suspect, and investigators were back to square one. In July of 2013, the 1-year mark of her abduction and subsequent return, Violet Ripken spoke to the press for the first time. In this interview, she made it clear that she wasn't going to hide away for the rest of her life. Quote, "I didn't want to go and hide. I felt like if I keep away from things, it's not going to be very fun for me. I had to face it." By the time she spoke to reporters, 75-year-old Violet Ripken had once again begun regularly attending minor league baseball games, and was mostly back to her old routine. Her family had taken safety precautions to make sure a similar incident did not happen again, but Violet was going back to her life as she knew it, unafraid. Just a few weeks after the 1-year mark came and went, Violet's son, Micheal Whelan Jr., announced that he was increasing the reward for information from $2,000 to $100,000. The original reward had been deemed paltry by some, who critiqued it for being such a small amount for such a high-profile and potentially major crime. Cal now agreed that the original reward of $2,000 wasn't enough, and was now hoping that the added cash incentive would inspire someone with information to come forward.
We want closure. We want to be able to move on. We want to feel a little bit more comfortable.
Ripken announced today that he's offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the man in the hat.
And hopefully this effort will get some new information and some new leads. We would like to get closure on this case and give all of us some peace of mind.
Baltimore Orioles great Cal Ripken addresses reporters Thursday a little more than a year since his mother Vi was abducted. In a desperate plea for help from the public, the Ripken family is now offering a $100,000 reward to finally solve their mother's case. Ripken said ever since that traumatic 24 hours, life for his entire family has never been the same.
Sometimes you put it in a safe place and kind of put it in a distance and then move on with your life, but in the back of your mind, it's always there.
Ripken told reporters he's just surprised that so far no arrests have been made.
It is what it is now. It's a little over a year, and hopefully this effort will get some new information and some new leads. There's a possibility that this isn't the first time he did it, and it might not be the last, so you need to catch him.
The Ripken family needs some peace of mind, they need justice, and this dangerous guy needs to be off the streets.
In an effort to extend the scope of the case, Ripken also asked personal friend John Walsh of America's Most Wanted to help.
Somebody knows who this guy is. He's more than likely done it before. He'll do it again. The Ripken family not only needs justice, they need closure. Amongst the lowlifes that populate this country, $100,000 is a lot of money. And if somebody knows who this dirtbag is, they'll drop a dime on it.
Unfortunately, Violet Ripken's 2012 abduction was not the only frightening incident that she would have to endure. A little over a year after her kidnapping, in October of 2013, once she had finally started to settle back into her routine once again, she was leaving an NBRS bank in downtown Aberdeen. As she left the bank and began walking towards her car, a man wielding a handgun confronted her in the parking lot. Again, a man had her at gunpoint and was demanding her car. But Violet, now nearly 76 years old, reacted quickly and pressed the panic button on her car keys. Her lights started flashing and her car horn started blaring repeatedly, attracting attention from everyone in the vicinity. Thankfully, Violet was not harmed, but was definitely frightened, this being the second firearm-related offense she had come face-to-face with in about 15 months, after all. The gunman fled from the scene, and was located by police roughly 2 hours later. In the aftermath, he was identified as 33-year-old Jesse Bowen, who lived nearby. He was later charged with attempted armed robbery, attempted armed carjacking, assault, and other offenses, including weapons and drug charges. Police did not believe the two separate incidents were related, with Bowen not matching any of the descriptions of Violet's kidnapper from 2012. Not only did he look different, but he was several inches shorter and weighed approximately 50 pounds less than the figure from the surveillance footage. The man behind the 2012 abduction of Violet Ripken is still wanted by law enforcement. Not only are Aberdeen and Maryland State Police still after him, but the FBI is as well. The culprit could face a possible 30-year prison sentence if found and convicted, which is the max punishment allowed under Maryland state law. Considering the factors of the abduction, it's a definite possibility, especially since kidnapping and weapons charges are not taken lightly and have no statute of limitations. The case remained the talk of the town in Aberdeen for some time, which is really saying something. Aberdeen, Maryland is no stranger to violent crime, with it being on the very outskirts of the Baltimore region, but it is not used to strange crimes like this, especially not crimes happening to the region's most high-profile residents. As you can imagine, this case has been rife with all kinds of theories, ranging from the believable to the bizarre. However, even though there have existed several theories implicating specific individuals, most of those theories seem to be split down the middle over the intentions of this mysterious kidnapper. Some remain convinced that this was an extortion attempt, which may or may not have come to fruition. Those that believe this theory tend to postulate that Violet's family, presumably her son, Cal Ripken Jr., came up with the funds for a ransom and paid her abductor, ultimately leading to her safe return. But if this had happened, even under the table, this would mean that the police themselves are in on it, as they would undoubtedly be aware of any ransom request or payments being made, as it would endanger or conflict with their own investigation. As you can see, this theory remains a bit of a conspiracy, and seems to hinge on the belief that police want to deter any potential copycats by pretending that no ransom attempt was made. I don't know how much I believe in this, as I don't think that I can ever quite believe that police would just let something like that transpire under their noses. But stranger things have happened. Then you have the other side, which believes that the culprit was someone out of his league, who just so happened to stumble upon the house belonging to the first mother of baseball. Perhaps he was just planning to rob the house, or even abduct a rich older woman for ransom, but changed his mind when he found out that Violet Ripken was such a high-profile target. Philip Becknell, a managing partner at Denault Becknell & Wells Investigative Group, a PI firm based out of Washington, D.C., explained this in an interview a few years ago. Quote, "My understanding is that it's possible he didn't appear to know who he had. There was no ransom demand. It doesn't appear he had too much of a plan except driving her around, and I think for that reason, the first thing that comes to mind is some kind of mental illness, that someone had it in their brain to do this for whatever reason." Becknell clearly believes that this man was a mentally deranged individual who kidnapped Violet Ripken for nothing but the thrill of it. And without knowing the man's identity or motivation, it's a theory that's impossible to rule out. We still don't know why the man committed this bizarre crime, so the bizarre power trip, or the robbery gone wrong, remain strong possibilities for the man's motive. Personally, I lean towards this being a robbery. There are so many unknown factors in this case, but one of the few things we know for a fact is that this man stole and used Violet's credit cards. Of course, this doesn't explain the abduction at all, and leaves a bunch of unanswered questions of its own, but it remains the most likely motive, in my opinion. In 2017, police released an age progression image of the suspect, showing what the culprit would look like now. It also showed what he looked like with glasses and a hat on, and included color and much more detail than the original sketch. It's an incredibly lifelike portrayal of the man that Violet Ripken recalls kidnapping her close to 7 years ago, a crime that is still unsolved. The $100,000 reward is still up for grabs for anyone that helps police identify the suspect. It is not believed that the case has gone cold, with investigators still looking into it as recently as 2017. But as of this episode's recording, the story behind the abduction of Violet Ripken remains unresolved. Thank you for listening to Unresolved. I do apologize if I've sounded a bit froggy or hoarse this episode. I've been battling allergies for a few months now, and they came back with quite the vengeance over the past week or two. Thankfully, it does not look like I'll be having to worry about them for much longer though, with my wife and I looking to move to the DC region in the coming months. But I hope I'll be able to keep recording until then. If you would like to learn more about myself or the show, make sure to follow along with Unresolved on social media. We have pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you could find any of those by searching for Unresolved Pod on your app of choice. If you would like to send in an email, you could do so by addressing it to micheal@unresolved.me. That's micheal@unresolved.me. And you could also send in any voicemails or text to 831-200-3550. If you want to find out any other information, view transcripts of any episodes, check out my sources or musical artist, or anything else, just head to the podcast website at unresolved.me. Once again, that's unresolved.me. There, you could also find links to the podcast store, which has some pretty cool stuff, and the Patreon page. The Patreon can also be found at patreon.com/unresolvedpod, and in return for small monthly payments, you can get access to all kinds of perks there, such as commercial-free episodes, early access, bonus mini-episodes, my exclusive series Resolved, and you can even become a producer of this show. At this moment, I'd like to thank the producers who help support the show through Patreon. These producers are Ben Krokum, Quil Carter, Laura Hannan, Astrid Kneier, Katherine Vatalaro, Damion Moore, Amy Hampton Miller, Timothy Stratton, Scott Meesey, Stephen Wilson, Sara Willemsen, Scott Patzold, and Marie Vanglund. Hope I got that right. Thank you all so much. It means the world to me that people would pay to listen to me say things into a microphone, and I honestly cannot thank all of you enough. All of you other Patreon supporters, and all of you listeners too. Thank you all so much. I know I give the Patreon producers an extra nudge or two at the end of each episode, but I truly appreciate all of you just taking the time to listen or spread the word or however it is you support the show. Without you, Unresolved would have died a long time ago, and I honestly can't thank you enough for your continued support. Now, unless allergies take my life over the next few days, I will hopefully be back with another new episode next weekend. But until then, I hope you all stay safe, and I will talk to you later.